Hello. This story was sent to us by our subscriber. It is based on real events. Please support it with likes and write words of support in the comments. If anyone wants to send us their story, please send it to our email in the description of our channel. Have a good listen. Time marches on. My name is Zachary Zach Carston. I retired from the United States Air Force as Lieutenant Colonel in 2007 after 26 years of service. 17 years later, I think it is now time to tell my story. I grew up in a suburb of northwestern Chicago, had a typical childhood, and I have no complaints. My parents were loving and attentive. My older brothers and sisters were more than supportive, looked after me, and kept me out of trouble. I was a decent student, but hitting the books at the time was not a strength of mine. Let me note that I did okay in spite of my rather paltry efforts in the classroom. My biggest challenge was probably at the dinner table. I have to laugh, but having 7 siblings and being the youngest in the family could result in a struggle for survival at the dinner table. The rule was that my father had the option of being served first, since he put the food on the table. He would always defer, and then mayhem would take place. It was actually pretty fun with all the forks and knives flying. Dinner time in our house was lively. We all talked about our day, and my parents always made sure we were well taken care of. The one area that I excelled at was sports and athletics. Do not ask me why, but I always seemed to have a sixth sense on a field or court on where to go with a ball or do something to support a teammate. I played football, baseball, and wrestled for my high school team. I also played intramural basketball, tennis, and even dabbled with the judo club. I always enjoyed sports. I was good at them, had some success, and it appeared that sports might be a way to finance my college education. At the time, I was considered to be big for a fullback and linebacker. At 6'1" and 205 pounds, I was strong and fast. My senior year of football went extremely well for me. Our team made the playoffs, made it to the state championship game, but lost in the final moments. I personally did well and was named All-Conference, All-Area, and was an honorable mention for the All-State team. My family was very supportive, and my father and older brothers were always there for me. My oldest brother was 12 years older than me with a family of his own, but he never missed my big games and matches if he could help it. Along with an army of nieces and nephews, I always had a large cheering section, and I admit that I felt like quite the man. Strangely enough, my most successful sport was wrestling, which I disliked the most. After football, I would cut down to wrestle at 185 pounds. With an additional 2-pound allowance, I was a force at this weight class, with a good combination of size, strength, speed, and coordination. During my senior year, I wrestled for the state championship and lost that match by a score of 6-3. Even though I lost that match, I was proud of my accomplishments and had my entire family in attendance at the final match. During all this time, I had my first real serious girlfriend. Becca was a very cute and vivacious girl who was a year younger than me. As a junior in high school, she was a cheerleader and was one of the school darlings. She was about 5'6", slim, and had long blonde hair. Becca's most compelling feature, at the time, was her piercing blue eyes. Many times, I looked into those beautiful blue eyes and lost myself in fantasy about what I would do to her and, of course, how much she would love it. The fact, though, is that I was still an immature boy and was very awkward when it came to romancing Becca. Things were great, and there was plenty of kissing and petting, but it did not go further than that. I wanted it to go further. I think Becca wanted it also, but I just did not know how to proceed further. My senior prom in 1981 went well, and Becca and I were there as a couple. Later that night, after the conclusion of the dance, we were at a party. After having too much alcohol, we were making out in the back seat of my father's vintage Cadillac. Things began to progress. My father was very prideful of the car he restored, and he allowed me to drive his car for this big night. During this event, Becca told me, "Sam, I want to go all the way with you tonight, and I really do love you." I quickly answered that I wanted her also, loved her, and thought that I was ready for whatever would happen. Now, of interest is that when I cleaned my father's car to get ready for the prom, I found a package of condoms in the glove compartment. Evidently, my father and my mother apparently also had some amorous activities in the car, and I made a mental note in my mind that there was protection in the car. I was not sure that protection would be needed, but I was hoping that it would be. Like the experienced Casanova that I was, Becca and I began to get into some hot and heavy action in the back seat of the car. We laughed often about it afterwards, but she noted that I probably gave her the best 30 seconds of her life before we finished this initial encounter. Our next encounter went much better, and I was able to give her, as she put it, a good time, and both of us were quite satisfied. One thing made me stop and think. I always heard stories about women losing their virginity, bleeding, and initial pain. But Becca did not have any of those issues. I asked her if she was okay, and she then sheepishly told me that she was not a virgin. Becca had been in a sexual relationship for over a year when she was sophomore, and her boyfriend was a senior. She had plenty of sexual experience, but did not want to spoil it for me. I wrongfully assumed she was a virgin when she was not. This revelation shook me, and my confidence took a shot. Becca quickly assured me that I was more than adequate, and if anything, she wanted more of me. I, of course, was up to this challenge, and we decided to go for one more ride before heading home. During the throes of passion, the condom broke, and I did not notice it until after we finished. Becca was worried but thought we would be fine due to the timing of her cycle. That being said, she was less than happy with me when we looked at the condom packaging from the protection that I had taken out of the glove compartment. Both of us were shocked when we read that the condoms were almost 5 years old and should not have been used due to time limitations. But I was a young punk, and what did I really know? During all of this time, I was preparing for college and had been offered athletic scholarships at several Division II state schools, where I would play football and maybe have the opportunity to wrestle as well. I was pretty sure that I would go to a state school in Western Illinois, and hopefully Becca would go there as well when she graduated a year after I did. 8 weeks after the prom, Becca and I were doing great, and I had invested in newer protection. Becca and I went at it whenever and wherever we could. I usually got home from school 2 hours before my mother and father. Becca and I went at it in just about room of the house, except my parents' bedroom and the kitchen. Say what you want about youth and romance, but my feelings for Becca were intense and intensified even more as a result of these activities. Following the conclusion of the wrestling season, I was working out all the time but had also gotten a job delivering pizza 3 nights per week for a popular restaurant with one of the older family cars. At this point in time, it was basically just me and my parents at the house. I could drive the oldest car anytime I wanted, and they let me use the car for my delivery job. To this day, the amount of money I received through tips and the delivery fee was great for an 18-year-old boy. Approximately 8 weeks after the prom, Becca came to me in tears and told me that, "We need to talk." The gist was that she was more than 8 weeks pregnant and would be having a baby at the end of 1981. I was going to be a dad at the ripe old age of 18, and her at 17 going on 18. I was in a state of shock and did not know what to do. Later that night, I told my parents, and they were in shock. But they were also calm and did not explode in anger or make any terrible accusations. My mother looked at me and said, "I know exactly what is going on. I was also 17 when I had your oldest brother. I am ashamed, though, that we did not better prepare you and educate you better to protect yourself and Becca. This is a tough situation to be in, and we will need to make plans. Becca is going to be the mother of our grandchild, and we want to support you." My father listened this whole time, and he then shook his head in approval to me after my mother concluded talking. I talked to Becca, and she told her parents about the pregnancy. They were not quite as supportive as my parents, but were not overall negative either. They tried to stay positive and suggested we all needed to get together and talk. It was on a Friday night that we all got together for the proverbial powwow. There was never any discussion or consideration of a termination. Becca noted she could not have a termination or live with it if she were to have such a procedure. Both sets of parents noted any decisions were up to Becca and me. They did note that times were changing, and we did not have to get married due to pregnancy. That did not mean we were not responsible for the care of the child, but marriage would not be automatically required. Support to us was promised regardless of whatever decision we would make. Becca and I had a series of discussions over the next several weeks. Giving up the baby for adoption was one option we strongly considered, but both of us decided we would not be able to live our lives not knowing what happened to our child. Becca was adamant that I should not give up on my athletic scholarship or college education. She thought my having a college education would be critical for all of us, regardless of what direction we decided to take. The bottom line, though, is that I deeply loved Becca and wanted to be there for her and my child. The issue is that I had no skills and limited job opportunities. One night I was talking with one of my brothers and noted my ongoing concern. He was quiet for a minute and then asked me if I had considered the military. He suggested I consider the Air Force, since he had served in the Marine Corps right out of high school. They would train me, educate me, and help me provide for my family. He noted I would have access to medical care for my family, housing, and a regular paycheck. I would not get rich, but would be able to take care of my family. During that week, I talked with Becca, and she said that she loved me, would marry me, and go with me wherever I was stationed. After this discussion, I talked with my parents about this. They were supportive and noted that it was important that I continued my education in order to better support my new family. I told them the Air Force would give me this opportunity, and they accepted my decision. I then went to see her parents, explained the situation, and requested their permission to marry Becca. They agreed and gave us their blessing. They were not exploding with enthusiasm, but did give us their support and were excited about their first grandchild. I was still finishing high school, but went through the enlistment process with the Air Force. After the test, physical examination, and processing, I was scheduled to go to USAF basic training in September or October, and then to an additional technical training school around November. I was excited that I had a guaranteed job in weather and meteorology, since this was a difficult area to get into, and I had luck with timing and job selection. I finished high school and received my diploma in June of 1981. My future wife, Becca, had dropped out of high school but was getting her GED, and she did plan on furthering her education also. The plan was that we would get married after I finished basic training and prepare for the baby in our future. She would be with her parents while I was in technical training and would join me at my first duty station. Things were going well, and we seemed to have a good plan. The rules and procedures have now changed since that time, but I got married to Becca before I left for basic training. My recruiter was less than pleased since it required additional paperwork and approvals. When I explained the situation to him, he went out of his way to help me and get the paperwork approved. When I went to basic training in October, I was a married man, and Becca would have access to medical care for both herself and the baby. Also, before I left, my father and I took a trip to a questionable neighborhood that he was aware of. I bought a nice engagement wedding ring at a very scary pawn shop with my pizza delivery money. My father also gave me some money on the sly, and noted it was between him and I. It was a very nice ring, and I got an amazing deal compared to what I would have paid at a regular jewelry store. My parents also paid to have it resized as a gift to me and Becca. It is not an exaggeration to say that Becca was shocked when I gave her the ring and formally asked her to marry me. She laughed, said yes, but noted that we had obviously already been practicing for the honeymoon. Our wedding was in late July and was actually quite an event. Both my father and father-in-law were veterans of the Korean War, and we had a nice wedding and reception at their VFW hall. It was not fancy, but was a lot of fun. We had almost 200 friends and family at the wedding. Becca looked amazing, and I was very proud of my new wife and future child. Several people laughed and noted that the bride and groom were old enough to get married, have a kid, but were not old enough to participate in the champagne toast. There was not a honeymoon. Becca and I lived in an okay furnished apartment that we could rent for several months before I left for basic training. We could have stayed with either set of our parents, but we wanted to be alone so we could build both our emotional and physical relationship. Suffice to say that we spent a lot of time building our physical relationship. It was a great time, but I prayed every night during this time that nothing would go wrong since neither of us had medical insurance. Times are different now, but I was 18 and no longer in school. My father's medical insurance did not cover me. Becca probably would have been still covered under her family's insurance since she was only 17 at the time, but she was married and pregnant. I just hoped nothing would happen. In early October, I left for USAF basic training. It went well, and I finished as an honor graduate. My parents were there with Becca, and I was very happy to see them all. Becca was obviously showing at this time, and several of my Air Force comrades teased me about being a daddy at the age of 18, and that Becca was too hot to marry a schlub like me. I had 2 days with my parents and Becca in San Antonio, including one night away from the base. I was embarrassed that Becca and I had our own hotel room with my parents next door. My father noted to me that I was now a married man, and I had nothing to be ashamed of by being alone with my wife. It was obvious that she loved me. He hoped that our reunion would go well. Let me just say that our night was magic. I had not seen Becca for 2 months. It is not an exaggeration for me to say that she learned that I could indeed be quite the man. Before basic training, I had filed the required paperwork, and Becca now had medical care and military benefits. We were looking forward to my finishing technical school and getting our first assignment where we could be together. It was during technical training that I had my first initial concerns. Becca did not do well in my absence. Her feelings were understandable, but there was nothing that I could do. The training course was 8 months, and I was not there for the birth of my first child. My parents and her parents were there, and I was very pleased to receive the update and Polaroids of the new baby, a beautiful daughter named Jessica. I was very proud of my wife and daughter. Becca and I talked on the phone as much as possible, and she was sarcastic with me over the phone, asking if I was doing well with my married life, but without the work and responsibilities that went with it. It was a tough situation, but we worked through it. She visited me with the baby several times over weekends and when I had a short class break. It was so good to see her and Jessica, and seeing them leave was even tougher. I was not making a lot of money at this time, so plane tickets were hard to afford. Several times she drove to the training base with her parents and my parents, and that did work out well also. She had also turned 18 at this time, so she now could at least do things like apply for a credit card. The great news was that our first assignment was in West Germany. I got a nice leave after technical school, had a wonderful time, and had a joyous reunion. We planned for the assignment and also learned we would probably have access to base housing instead of renting an apartment in town. This was good since Becca would be able to make friends easier and have a support structure. We were stationed in Germany for 4 years, and we had an amazing time. Becca looked great, and Jessica was growing so fast. For those of you who were stationed in Europe during the 1980s, you will hopefully recall the USAF sports leagues, United States Air Forces in Europe. I played football, wrestled, and did some boxing and judo as well. I developed an interest in martial arts through this exposure and still participate in martial arts tournaments and events to this day. The Air Force treated me well, and I did work on extending my education through CLEP tests and taking courses at the Base Education Center. Combined with the college credit that I received for basic training and technical training, I was in good shape toward earning my college degree. During these years, I also received several promotions and became a staff sergeant. An E5 is not a high rank in the Air Force, but I was able to take care of my family and do some meaningful and important work. Becca was also doing really well at this time also. She also took courses at the Base Education Center and got very involved with fitness and aerobics on the base. She was very interested in earning her certification as an aerobics instructor, and she hoped that someday she would open her own fitness facility. I always supported Becca's efforts, and our future was limitless. We worked around our schedules so that Jessica had the best of care and love. In spite of all this activity, Becca and I always found time to show her that I was quite the man. In our second year, Becca gave me the happy news that we would be having another child. Later that year, our second daughter was born, and we named her Stephanie. At the end of our third year, we were then pleasantly surprised that she was pregnant with our third child. 9 months later, into our fourth year in Germany, our third daughter arrived, and we named her Janelle. It was incredible. I was only about 23 years old, but had a beautiful wife, 3 amazing daughters, and a promising professional future. Things were looking good. After 4 years, we received a new assignment to Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. We really looked forward to our new base in such a nice area. The base was wonderful. My job was going well. The climate was incredible. Becca was happy, and the girls were doing great. In about 18 months, I would be eligible to take the test for Technical Sergeant E6 and hopefully get the raise that went with it. My long-term goal was to finish college, apply for my commission, and qualify for flight training. I was not sure if this was realistic, but that was my goal. We had not been there long, but quickly settled in since we were in a fun place and things were going well. Becca asked me to get a vasectomy, and after some discussion, I agreed. Having Becca on a regular basis and being able to shoot for the skies was something that I was completely in support of. Becca had also gotten a job as an aerobics instructor for several fitness facilities in the area and was doing well. Becca looked great after having 3 daughters and taking care of her family. Being as young as she was allowed her to get back into shape and get even fitter. One day, Becca came to me and noted she was very pleased with her life, but had some self-confidence issues with her body. Her biggest issue was her breasts. After 3 children and extensive breastfeeding, her breasts were no longer as wonderful and full as they once were. I had no issue or concern with her breasts, but she asked for my permission to have a breast enhancement procedure. It was expensive, but we could swing it through monthly payments and budgeting. I admit that I was intrigued by some of the before and after photos she showed me, and I looked forward to some very passionate nights with her in various outfits. Becca was pleased when I gave my approval, and the procedure was scheduled. After Becca grilled me, I admitted that larger implants would be my preference. Becca smiled and told me that I would go crazy when I saw her with a huge rack. Becca had the procedure and had large double D implants. She really looked incredibly hot and sexy with her new figure and sultry look. Because of her new look, Becca also began to dress more provocatively and show more of her hot body and figure. I was really into her. Our nights were hot, and she was also more than into it. I had no complaints. Being in Vegas, she had the perfect look for that town and fit in well with the glitz and glamour. The only concern I now had is that Becca had made several new friends through her fitness work that were into partying, clubbing, and living, what I saw as a single and wild lifestyle. Becca told me that I had nothing to be worried about. She never had the chance to go out since she was so young when she got married and then had 3 children by the age of 22. She asked me if it was really a big deal that she would go out with her friends once or twice per month to have a few drinks and have a good time. I told her that I had no issue with her going out for dinner, going to a movie, etc. But I told her it was inappropriate for her to be in clubs, wearing revealing sexy clothing, drinking to excess, staying out very late, and dancing and flirting with other men. She listened to me, but still continued with what I saw as disturbing behavior. I do not think she was physically cheating, but she was acting in a way that a married woman with 3 young daughters should not. One night she came home very intoxicated, and she was acting in a strange manner. I believed she had ingested some type of drug. We talked the next day, and she admitted that she had snorted cocaine for the first time offered to her by some guy in a nightclub. She was completely hammered, made out with him on the dance floor. He felt her up, and then tried to get her to spend the night in a hotel with him. She said nothing serious happened, but my hair went up and I was very upset. Besides what I saw as cheating, I was in the Air Force. If she was caught or involved in a drug-related incident, I could face severe consequences. She could be barred from the base, or we could be kicked out of base housing. I was coming up for examination and possible promotion to E6, and something like this could impact my promotion and even potentially remaining in the Air Force. It was a tough day. I told her that she was a married woman and that if she wanted to stay with me as my wife, then her partying and clubbing days were officially over. If she wanted to continue that lifestyle, then we would split, and a judge would decide on what would happen next. She was very apologetic and promised this would not happen again. I think this might have been a wake-up for her. Things did get better, but there was still an undercurrent of tension. Later that year, Becca began to teach aerobics at a gymnasium and fitness facility owned by a local bodybuilder named Paul. He was a handsome man with a chiseled body. He was only about 5'7" tall, but was seen as quite the stud. Paul was in his 30s and quite a bit older than me. He was divorced with 2 children from an earlier marriage. He was actually a likable person, and his employees and clients respected him. Becca enjoyed working for him, and Becca's classes and approach to fitness and aerobics expanded his business. He was glad to have her as part of his business, and they worked together on a closer and closer basis. One time, Becca told me that Paul had asked her to pose for some photos in beachwear that would be used to advertise his gyms and fitness facilities. I was not a huge fan of this opportunity, but she told me she wanted to do this. She could make some extra money. And there was a need for figure models in Las Vegas. It was only beachwear photos, so that should not be an issue. That being said, my jaw hit the table when the advertisements came out with the photos. There were several photos of her and Paul, with him holding her in his arms, while she looked adoringly at him. She was in a very revealing bikini and did look great. I was actually less than impressed with Paul. He was in some type of weird swimsuit that actually did him no justice. In the manhood arena, if you know what I mean. The night I saw the advertisements with the photos was an ugly one. I told Becca the photos were disrespectful to me and our marriage. Her answer to me was that I was jealous over nothing. They were just beachwear photos, and I was just jealous of Paul because of his physique. I did laugh at this and told her that I could crush him as the little guy he was. In fact, I told her that maybe Paul and I should have a little talk. When I finished with him, maybe she would not think he was so appealing if he had no teeth to go with his less than impressive manly assets. Becca told me nothing was going on with Paul, and I was imagining things. I began to feel uncomfortable with their expanding relationship. Becca seemed secretive and was often out of the house at odd hours. She claimed it was work-related, but I did not buy it. We had always worked well together on juggling our schedules to support our daughters and their activities. But now there were problems, and she would be gone without explanation for several hours at a time. Her explanations were weak, and I almost think she did not care what I thought. Things began to get stranger, and to me, it was clear that Becca had something new going on in her life, and I suspected it was Paul. She consistently denied it, but I had seen them together, and I was uncomfortable with their exchanges and interactions. I was not sure if a physical affair was taking place, but I was very uncomfortable with where this was heading. The key concern driving much of the discord continued to be that Becca did not do well when I was away, and she had a hard time being alone with only the kids. I had been deployed several times or sent on temporary duty, TDY assignments. My being away from home was tough on Becca, and she often complained about being lonely, missing our intimacy, and being a family. In 1986-1987, I was assigned to a 9-month TDY, and Becca was saddened. She wished me a good trip, but told me outright she did not think she could wait for me. She did tell me she loved me. The loneliness was just too much for her, and she was not cut out to be a military spouse. It is not like I had a choice, so I said goodbye to my wife and daughters and left. About 3 months later, I received the proverbial Dear John letter. Becca told me she could no longer handle being so lonely and had fallen in love with Paul. She was planning to divorce me and marry Paul. She emphasized this would not cause issues with the relationship between my daughters and myself. She only wanted what she was entitled to. She also noted that Paul was a very successful businessman with different business interests and would be able to give her a much better life than I could offer. I, of course, was devastated, but I was also always a realist. If she did not want to be with me and wanted to be with a different man, I wished her the best, and she should move on. My biggest concern was my children, and being able to maintain a meaningful relationship with them. A number of acquaintances in the area later told me she was shocked at my reaction. She somehow seemed to think I would come flying back to fight for her. It was totally unrealistic, since I could not have done that even if I wanted to. If she wanted out, then I had no intention of trying to force her to stay with me. I went to the base legal office at my TDY location to get some insight. The office was basically a tent, but the one attorney on the base noted the Air Force could not represent me in a divorce. He gave me the name of an attorney he knew in Vegas who had a family law practice. Please note this was in the 1980s, and there were no mobile phones, internet, email, apps, etc. Communication at this time was all by written correspondence or a landline, and time delays were a concern. My attorney requested a continuance at a hearing until I was able to rotate back home and could work with him to protect my interests. To my wife's chagrin, several continuances were requested and approved. She had been hoping for a quick divorce so she could move forward to marry Paul. I did not have a lot of assets, but she was trying to make claims on my pension, our modest savings, and a request for spousal support. I was shocked at some of her claims. As one example, she claimed that Pell Grants given to me to finish my education should be included as part of my compensation for the purposes of spousal support calculations. One positive is that she encouraged my daughters to write to me during my TDY, and she apparently did not badmouth me in any way. She did not shy away from the truth with her daughters. She told me that she'd grown apart from me, could not handle the separations, detested the military spousal lifestyle, and had fallen in love with another man. Our daughters were saved, but there was not much I could do until I got home. Becca had moved out of base housing and in with Paul. He had a large, spacious home, and he had things that I could not offer. For example, each girl now had their own room, which was a big plus for all of them. They missed me, but they were young girls and did not fully understand the whole situation. I rotated back to the base and then worked with my attorney to protect my daughters and my own interests. A meeting was held with me and my attorney and Becca with her attorney. I was less than pleased that Paul was there also. Becca did not look me in the eyes and kept looking away. Paul sat out of the way and did not make any comments. He was apparently there as a support to Becca, but he was not involved in the negotiation in any way. Virtually all of my wife's demands were not going anywhere. We were married for less than 10 years, so she had no claims on my military pension. Her calculations of my salary were also flawed and included numbers that could not be included, such as my receiving PEL grants for education. The upshot of it was that the girls would be covered by me for medical, I would pay child support, and we would divide our moderate savings. We had about $8,500 in savings that we had been putting aside to someday buy a home. After more discussion, it was decided she would receive all of the savings in exchange for relinquishing all claims to spousal support. The only comment that Paul ever made at the time was that he had plenty of money, and this small amount of money would not make any difference. We did agree on a parenting schedule. Becca was the custodial parent, but I would be able to see the girls on weekends and during the week. Becca noted I was a great father, and that I could see the girls whenever I wanted. She had no intention of causing a rift between me and my girls. She told me that her marriage to Paul would not impact how we would work together to parent our girls. She kept her word to help ensure my daughters and I continued to have a close relationship. So, the divorce was finalized, and I moved out of base housing and into an apartment close to the base. I did see my girls on a regular basis and participated in all of their activities. Becca was always polite to me, and we worked well parenting the kids. Sometimes Paul would be around. He would usually be polite but reserved with me. I wanted to hate him, but time and space lessened those feelings. We split holidays, and several times I drove back home to Chicago with the girls to see my family and also Becca's family. Sadly, Becca and her family had become estranged over this situation. They really looked down on her choices and refused to acknowledge Paul or let him in their house. It was a surreal night when I talked my former in-laws into reconciling with their cheating daughter and her new boyfriend and future husband. They told me they saw what she did as a betrayal to me and our girls and would not in any way approve of it. I told them that I appreciated their support, but they needed to reconcile with her for themselves, Becca, and their granddaughters. After a reconciliation, Becca called me in tears to thank me. She was sorry for how she handled the whole situation. I put family first, and she told me that I am the strongest man she ever met. A lot had taken place in my life at this point. I was still only 27 years old, and now had 9 years in the Air Force. One positive is that I now had the time to finish my college education part-time and pursue my long-term gold-star dream of getting my commission and going to flight training. Age was not an issue for me at this time, but I needed to make a move now if I wanted to actually pursue this. My degree was completed and conferred by the University of Maryland University College. I took a preparation course and hired a retired USAF pilot trainer to tutor me and prepare for the examination. To my intense joy, I scored in the top 5% on the examination and went through several selection and review boards. It was with intense pride that I called my parents and told them that I had been selected to go to officer training school and been selected for flight training as a pilot. I then called Becca and asked her if I could come over to see my girls. My girls were excited to learn that I would become a pilot. My youngest daughter did not really understand and asked if I would have to grow wings. I could be wrong, but think that I saw a shadow of regret on Becca's face. Paul also seemed to show some jealousy. He did not say anything spiteful but walked away after congratulating me. Between officer training school and flight training, I spent little time near Las Vegas over the next 2+ years. I wrote my girls several times per week, called several times per week, tried to see my girls when I could, and never forgot to send cards, gifts, etc. Becca apparently would tell my girls that I was away doing important work protecting the country, and they should be proud of their father. The girls once told me that Paul would apparently grimace at these statements but kept his opinion to himself. To his credit, he also never badmouthed me or tried to harm the relationship between me and my daughters. After conclusion of my training, I was again stationed in West Germany, flying the A-10 Thunderbolt at a base, which is now unfortunately closed. It was difficult to see my daughters on a consistent basis but still wrote several times every week. I did visit them in Vegas several times per year and took them to see my parents in Chicago. We also worked out a schedule so my daughters could come to Germany each summer after school was out. I would then take leave and we would travel through Europe. My girls had the chance to see things and visit places that many people would never have the opportunity to do. This worked well until they began to get older and had friends, activities, and their own social lives. All that being said, I remained close to my daughters and tried to be in their lives as much as possible. Life was going well. My career was going great. I earned my master's degree also, and had been promoted several times after I received my commission as an officer. I flew in combat during the First Gulf War, Shield Storm, over the Balkans, and various other assignments. When I came home, my daughters would ask me to wear my uniform with all my decorations. My ex-wife, Becca, would usually have a look of regret when she saw me, and Paul would sometimes have a look of jealousy. Paul was always polite to me, but I could tell this rankled him. Now, let me be clear that Paul was extremely good to my girls. I was usually not available for many events since I did not live in the Las Vegas area. He would be at their events, was the stepfather at daddy-daughter dances, and really supported them. To my surprise, he really was a stand-up guy when it came to being a stepfather. Ironically, he was estranged from his biological kids due to a hostile divorce from his first wife. She had run off with the owner of a car dealership where she worked. The girls were very important to him. In one of our few conversations, he apologized to me for how he and Becca got together and how the situation was handled. He also told me that he loved my girls as if they were his own, and hoped that I did not have an issue with that. I felt a surge of anger for a moment, but realized this was only a good thing for my girls. I told him that I certainly did not like how things had taken place, but I appreciated all he had done for my girls. It is important that I emphasize once again how good Paul was to my girls, and always looked out for them. The goodness he showed to my girls also lessened my dislike for him. Becca and Paul also had one child of their own, an active little boy named Paul Jr. I think both of them were very surprised when I sent a gift for his birth and never forgot his birthday or Christmas. He was the half-brother of my girls, and I felt that I needed to make sure that I did not exclude him because of my divorce from his mother. One time I came in for a short visit, and I was invited to a picnic at a local park with the whole family. My parents and her parents were also there for a trip, and it was a big group. At this point, I had not seen my wife or Paul for several years. Unfortunately, my wife had a haggard and tired look. Paul no longer looked like a handsome bodybuilder. He looked bloated, somewhat chubby, and was a shell of what he had once been. He told me that he prided himself on being a good tennis player. There were courts at the park, and he asked me to play a game. Without bragging, I admit to being proud that I crushed him. He was slow, paunchy, and showed little athleticism. I had now been in the service now for 20 years, was required to remain in good physical condition, and I had always been a solid athlete. My weight was the same as the day I went to basic training. I think Paul was chagrined and embarrassed in front of his family after being completely thrashed. My father gave me a look and told me later on, "Now that is what I call a retribution ass-kicking." Paul also looked less than pleased when Paul Jr. asked one half-sister who I was. He was a little guy and did not understand family dynamics. Paul Sr. was even more chagrined when my girls told him that I was their actual father, was a good athlete, and was a military pilot with a lot of medals. Becca also looked down when she heard this. If I could have, I would have given each of my daughters a $20 bill after hearing this. I had no desire to cause an issue, but will admit to being pleased with the outcome. My girls were all doing great with high school, jobs, activities, college, dating, and getting married. My oldest daughter, Jessica, got engaged, and the wedding and reception would take place in Las Vegas. Her fiancé called me and asked for permission to marry Jessica. He told me that Paul looked like the fifth wheel when she came home to announce their engagement. For some reason, I had some empathy for the guy. The wedding plans were moving forward, and the day was coming closer. One day I was talking with my middle daughter about the wedding. Everybody was very excited about the wedding, but Paul felt left out. My daughter noted that Jessica was going to call me and ask if Paul could have a role. Specifically, would I be okay with Paul being an usher and doing a reading during the wedding? I told her that I would be okay with this. Jessica called me several days later along to discuss what I had originally heard. She claimed that she knew nothing about the earlier discussion with her younger sister, but asked what I thought since I was paying for half of the event. She understood I had animosity toward Paul, but she had known him since she was a little girl. He had always been good to her, and she wanted him to be involved. I agreed and noted it was not an issue. Wedding preparations continued to take place. I took leave, flew in the week before, and planned to stay about 2 weeks. I rented a very nice hotel room in town and did plenty of swimming and saw my family and friends. It was a really great time. The night before the wedding, we went through the rehearsal. Do not ask me why, but during the practice, it occurred to me that this wedding was for my daughter, and I had to do what was best for her. After the first practice session, we were going to do a quick second run-through. I took Jessica to the side and asked her if she saw Paul as a father figure. She told me directly that she loved me as her father, but had always seen Paul as a second father. I asked her if she had originally wanted Paul to walk her down the aisle and if I had failed her as a father. She looked at me, gave me a resounding no, but then noted that if I was not in her life, he would be her choice. I told her that I am glad she had so much love and empathy for people. Outside of my ego, maybe it was time to let everything go. Maybe there is room for both Paul and I with the giveaway. She looked puzzled when I said this. We were getting ready for the second practice session when I asked Jessica if she trusted me. She looked at me in an incredulous manner, seemed to know what I was talking about, but then looked me directly in the face and said, "Yes." I then walked over to Paul and said to him in an aggressive manner while he was sitting in the pew by himself, "What in the hell do you think you are doing?" He looked at me confused and maybe a little scared. I think he thought I was going to confront him, but I then told him, "Come on, get over here. We are going to do this together, and you are going with me on this walk tomorrow. He looked at me, then understood what I was telling him, and broke down in sobs. Becca looked at me with surprise and began to cry also. I told him later that things did not go the way I wanted, but that was many years ago. I owed him for how well he had treated my girls. I needed his help to walk Jessica down the aisle and give her away in marriage. He then broke down again, and it was at this moment I truly realized how important my girls were to him. When the question was asked, "Who gives this woman in marriage?" our joint answer was, her mother, father, and second father. It was a very emotional moment. It might be unorthodox, but I think that I made the right decision. My biggest concern was whether Paul would be able to maintain his composure during the wedding. He told me that he would be calm and would practice the line. He then looked down and also told me that he had long been threatened and jealous of me in many ways. He was a successful businessman. But his first marriage had failed. His kids would have nothing to do with him. I was seen as the hero USAF fighter pilot, athlete, my daughters adored me, and he suspected Becca was still actually in love with me. It sounds strange, but here I was, now supporting and consoling the man that my wife left me for and helped destroy my marriage. It was at that point, though, that I told him the truth. Becca was not happy with me in the military. We would have eventually divorced, and I was actually lucky that she got involved with a man that took such good care of our daughters. My daughters asked me to also wear my uniform at the reception. I was hesitant to do that since it would seem like I was one of those schlubs you see on YouTube, using their uniforms as a way to get free drinks and free lunch at the local Denny's. The girls told me that all of my decorations were earned, and they wanted to be in photos with me. So, I hesitantly agreed and changed into my dress uniform from my tuxedo after the wedding and photos. I had people offer to buy me drinks until I told them it was an open bar, and I was footing half of the bill for the wedding. Paul and Becca insisted on paying half also. Paul and I had a few drinks together, and I believe we developed a friendship that weekend, as strange as they might sound. During the initial father-bride dance, it was a little clumsy since both Paul and I danced with Jessica at the same time. She held each of our hands, and it went well. Paul asked me if I was okay with this before the dance. I told him it was fine, and this was about Jessica and her husband. She was very excited and pleased. Paul once again was overcome by emotion and afterwards began to sob. Many people came to me, congratulated me, and noted they respected how I put my daughter first. I acknowledged Paul's support of my girls, and that I did all I could to make the whole family happy. I danced with Becca when she came up to me and asked if I had any plans to dance with her at all. My response was that I did not want to cause an issue or embarrass her in any way. She looked hurt and noted we had been married and had 3 lovely daughters. Would I deny her a dance at the wedding of our daughter? We danced to several songs, and during this time she told me that she had deep regrets about how things had worked out. The truth is that she was not cut out to be a military spouse, married Paul out of convenience, but did learn to respect and love him. She told me that to her I was the most handsome man at the wedding, and my uniform and decorations was a testament to my integrity and strength as a man. She also leaned in and told me that she would always have deep romantic love for me and would never forget our nights together. She would always wonder what would have happened if I did not go into the Air Force. I told her that was a what-if, and we could only deal with reality. We concluded the dance and she went back to the table. The rest of the night was fun with dancing, drinking, telling jokies, and all of that fun wedding stuff. The next day we all had breakfast, and Jessica and her husband left for their honeymoon. I was asked about my plans for the future, but everybody pretty much knew that I would be going one more time into harm's way, several years before the 9/11 attack had taken place. I had already flown once again over Iraq for the Second Gulf War and would be rotating again for another tour. I did tell my family that my time in the service was close to ending and that I planned to retire after completing my 26th year, and that I would probably come back to live in the Las Vegas area to be near my girls. Before leaving, everybody wished me the best, and they would write to me. During my time in the Middle East, my kids wrote to me all of the time. Of interest is that Paul and Becca also wrote to me and sent me a care package of chocolate, cookies, and other goodies. Much of it was melted, but I had no problem eating it anyhow. After about a year, I completed my tour and was coming home. I knew that I had about 18 months to go in the Air Force and would retire as a lieutenant colonel. I was proud of myself since I had started out as an airman basic and would retire as an officer and pilot. I never expected my life and career to go the way it did. The question is, what would I do after retirement? I had some degree of freedom due to my military pension and benefits. I was still a relatively young man at 44 years of age. I had my whole life in front of me, and it was time to start thinking about a second career. I thought about trying to get a pilot job with an airline, but I was a fighter pilot with little interest in learning to fly wide-body aircraft at this point in my life. My age at this time would have also been an obstacle for me. I had a friend who also had retired from the Air Force and ran an aviation service company. He offered me a nice job, but after thinking about it, I decided to say no. I wanted a job that would give me some freedom in my schedule, allow me to do things I like to do, and still allow me to make a decent amount of money. After a whole of research and consideration, I decided to get some practical experience and prepare for the licensing process to be a home and commercial facility inspector. I know it is completely unrelated to my military career, but it is what I wanted to do. Another good military friend was in the business, and I would be an independent contractor for him. I could schedule my appointments and still leave time to do the things I really enjoyed, such as cycling, tennis, and swimming. I also volunteered my time at various youth organizations coaching sports for the kids. Of interest is that I actually had the opportunity to coach Paul Jr. in soccer for a Park District program. He was a very solid player, and I enjoyed being able to coach him. The parents of the kids on the team were very surprised when they learned that I was coaching the son of my ex-wife. All that being said, life was good, and I had no complaints. I retired from the Air Force in 2007 and moved to Vegas to start my second life. I bought a very nice condo with a great pool, gym, and tennis courts. I saw my daughters on a regular basis. There were additional weddings, Paul participated, and I was soon blessed with the arrival of grandchildren. That was one good thing about getting married young and having children at a young age. I was a young grandfather and could enjoy the kids and more than keep up with them. I kept myself in shape and was proud to say I was still the same weight as the day I went to basic training. Becca was also doing well. With the girls on their own, she got back into fitness and really looked great. She laughed that she also had a breast augmentation tune-up, and things were looking both very large and perky. One time I had the chance to see Becca at her pool, and I must admit that I was more than impressed to see her in a very revealing swimming suit. She did look darn good. I was very happy to be in Vegas with my girls. Probably the biggest regret of my life was that I was not always there for my girls due to where I was being stationed and my professional military responsibilities. My biggest fear is that I had failed my girls as a father. Even to this day, I continue to have this concern and just want to do right with my family. Romance had not been an issue or concern for me over the years. I had no problem meeting women in both Europe and in the United States. I continued to be active in the martial arts and met some very attractive and fit women through these events. I had several long-term relationships. I was clear up front with these wonderful ladies that I had no interest in another marriage or children. Having my children so young created a different dynamic for me. Several of the women I met were less than 30 years of age and told me they wanted marriage and children. I had already been down that road and did not want to go that way again. But I had no complaints, and my romantic life was great. All that being said, I never had the type of intimacy that I had with Becca when we first married. I guess it was just our chemistry and youthful energy. Of interest is that, several years before my retirement, there had been an article in the Air Force Times about some of the items pilots brought into the cockpit for good luck. The Air Force generally did not have an issue or concern so long as the item brought into the cockpit did not get in the way or cause safety issues. My good luck charm was a photo of myself with Becca and the girls standing on a beach. In the article was a photo of my cockpit that then showed the old photo of me and my family. I was actually embarrassed when I saw this, I had long been divorced from Becca, and this photo showed a happier earlier time. I never thought much about the article and did not talk about it since I was embarrassed. What I did not know was that Becca saw the article after it was given to her by a friend several years after it had been published. Apparently, Becca was very moved by this photo. We had been divorced for years, but this family photo was the one thing I wanted when I flew a sortie. Becca called me out of the blue, asked to meet with me to discuss our relationship, but did not mention the article. I thought about it for a minute after recalling how sexy and built she looked at the pool, but decided this would not be a good thing to do. I know it sounds strange, but I would not do anything that would cause harm to the family. She called me several times, but I always found a way to avoid a meeting. I think Becca eventually got the message and left me alone. I was not sure if she wanted some type of relationship with me or was just looking for closure. Either way, I decided to avoid that pitfall. Sadly, the years had not been kind to Paul. He continued to deteriorate and had some heart problems. I had always assumed, but did not know for sure, that he was a user of steroids in his youth. I was correct when he told me that he had been a prolific user of steroids when he was younger and was now paying the price. It was sad because anybody who met him now would have never associated him with his bodybuilding youth. Paul passed away in 2012 at the age of 63 from heart disease. In a strange way, we were friends, and I was sad to learn of his death. Becca and my daughters were sad and prepared for his service. The one bright spot was that he had reconciled with his biological children several years before and had gotten to know his grandchildren. He died at a relatively young age, but actually had a very fulfilling professional and personal life. He left behind a very considerable estate. It was shared between my wife, daughters, and his biological children, including Paul Jr. I did not realize how astute he had been in business until I learned how much he left to each person. They would not be able to live the rest of their lives in luxury, but he provided enough for each of them to have a very comfortable life. Becca was apparently living the single life. I saw her at family events like birthday parties. We flew back to Chicago together several times for funeral services for our parents. Nothing ever happened, but I always had the feeling Becca would have been more than into it if I showed interest. I admit that I thought about it since the years had been very kind to Becca since she got back into shape. She continued to have that hot, sultry, top-heavy look that I really liked. I knew from our personal experience and history that we had always been dynamite between the sheets. But I did not want to go to that level. It is interesting how things can work out. I understood that Becca was probably dating, and so was I. It was during 2013, 2014, and both of us were now 50 years old. My daughters had organized a birthday party at a local establishment to celebrate Becca's 50th birthday. I was surprised to be invited. My original RSVP response was no, but my daughters contacted me and asked that I please reconsider. My wife and I did have some good years together and had 3 children. I did reconsider and told them that I would be there. The birthday party would be held at a place that had great burgers and beer, so I would have a good meal and enjoy a few beverages. During the party, a rather large, swarthy man, about 50 years old, came in with several friends. He was sitting at the bar and noticed Becca. He sent a drink over to her and asked that she please come and sit with him at the bar. Apparently, this guy seemed to be well known at the bar, and he thought quite highly of himself. He was a big man, seemed to have bullying tendencies, and did not like to be told no. Becca walked over to him, thanked him for the drink, but graciously noted she was at a family party and could not sit with him. This guy did not want to accept that and began to get really snarky with her. When Becca tried to walk away, he grabbed her roughly by the arm and told her to sit down. At this point, I walked over and told him to take his hands off her and to leave her alone. This guy was probably 5 to 6 inches taller than me and was probably 50 pounds heavier. But that did not mean much to me. I had a strong background in martial arts, wrestling, boxing, etc. I was not as big as this guy, but I was not intimidated. He also had what I call the big man gut, and he looked soft and weak. I told him that I did not want to fight. He should leave Becca alone. We were trying to have a family event, and I considered the matter concluded. He looked at me, laughed, and then threw a slow, looping punch at me. Without getting into a lot of detail, he ended up in an ambulance going to the hospital to have his broken nose fixed and to reset his broken jaw. Responding police reviewed the bar cameras and told me that unless I wanted to file a complaint, the issue was apparently resolved. I never heard a word from the man and assumed he decided that his best bet was to let this go also. Following what I would call a minor tussle, I calmly sanitized my hands with a container on the bar, straightened my clothes, and sat down to finish my burger and beer. I did not say anything after sitting down, but my entire family looked at me with silent admiration and disbelief. I looked up and asked why everybody looked so shocked. My girls told me they knew I had an athletic background, but did not know that I had such dangerous skills. My answer was that the Air Force prepared me for a lot of different things, and I apparently learned something besides flying after 26 years. Becca told me she was very appreciative of what I had done, and we began to talk. I should point out that Becca had a very sultry outfit on that showed plenty of cleavage and had a very sexy look. It was a perfect fit for Las Vegas. The party broke up later that night, and I was going to go home. Becca had driven to the party with Paul Jr., but he had left before the end of the party to meet his girlfriend after she got off work. Jessica and her husband were going to drop her off until Becca asked if I could. Her house was on the way for me, and it was getting late. I agreed to drive her home, but noted that everybody grinned and smirked at me when we left the sports bar. They seemed to know something that I did not. Becca and I walked to the car, and I helped her in. We had some small talk as I drove her home and told her that she looked great at her birthday party. Becca told me that she did not think I noticed. I told her that she darn well knew that I looked at her tonight and had always appreciated her beauty. I prepared to drop Becca off, and she asked me if I wanted to come in for a drink. I was going to tell her this was not a good idea until I took another good look at her eyes, deep cleavage, and dynamite figure. I swallowed and told her, "Sure, why not?" Becca smirked as we got out of the car, and she knew what was on my mind. We had a couple of drinks, and Becca commented that I should not drive home because I had been drinking. I agreed with her when she then suggested that we go for a late-night swim. I had a swimsuit in the trunk of my car in my workout bag. I was then sitting in a patio chair. I am convinced that my jaw hit the pool deck when Becca walked out in a really hot bikini. Becca was a 50-year-old woman but had an incredible busty figure. Talk about hot. She dove in and asked me to join her. For obvious reasons, I did not want to stand and told her that I wanted to sit and rest for a minute. Becca knew the reason why and told me to dive in when her good old friend would relax and stand down. A minute later, I dove in, and the water was great. Becca had brought out a bottle of spirits, and we had a few drinks together in the pool. We were quietly talking when Becca put her hands on my chest. I am not sure why, but that old chemistry was back. I took her in my arms and gave her a passionate kiss. It had been many years since we had kissed in this way. Without doubt, I never lost passion for Becca, and our chemistry together was incredible. That night was incredible, and it was a real night of passion. We never had problems in the bedroom. That morning, Becca laughed and told me that she learned that I could still be quite the man. I thought about the situation, decided what the hell, and asked her to go out with me on a date. We began dating and had many hot and passionate nights. Paul Jr. was still living at Becca's house, so we did not go there out of respect for his feelings. One day, Paul Jr. came to me and told me that he had no issue with my dating his mother. He laughed and noted that we had already been married and had 3 kids. It is not as if we did not each other already in a variety of ways, including the biblical one. Paul Jr. also told me that his father liked me and would have wanted Becca to be happy. I thanked Paul Jr., but it was still awkward for me to stay over at Becca's home when we were all there. Eventually, Paul Jr. got married and started his own family. Becca and I were going hot and heavy and stayed together almost every night. Being home without any kids, it was almost the same as 1981. Back then, we had nothing but ourselves. We learned that, despite our age, we still had each other and our amazing chemistry. Since I was no longer in the Air Force, We had plenty of time together and separations were no longer a concern. Becca and I had a long talk about cheating and monogamy. We were no longer kids, and she understands that if she were to transgress again, we would be done for good and would go our separate ways. She has explained to me that she is no longer the young girl who made such dumb mistakes. That girl felt lonely, isolated, and felt she had nothing else in her life but to have kids and be alone. That girl did not see the big picture or have maturity and patience. That girl did not appreciate that trust and love was the bedrock of a relationship until she threw it away. But she was no longer that girl. Becca told me she had evolved into a mature woman who understood and appreciated the importance of loyalty, trust, and integrity in a relationship. She told me that her love for me was stronger than ever, and she would never give me any reason to doubt her again. That has proven to be the case now for many years. Later that year, after dating and romance, we had another long discussion about our future. Both of us decided that our initial marriage had ended in disaster, and our current relationship was passionate, hot, and rewarding. Why try to change what is working so well? So we made a decision to date exclusively, enjoy ourselves, but not get remarried. It is now 2024, and it appears that the best thing that ever happened to us was divorce and then getting back together to date exclusively. Strangely, we still have our own places, but we almost always spend the night together. We take vacations together, attend family events together, and basically are living our lives together. The only difference is we are not married and are together because we want to be. We have no complaints, and our relationship is working well for us. I have no complaints, and let me conclude by saying, time marches on. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.